of you that I saw pop up that have heard me talk about this before, but I'm hoping to bring in some new games and techniques and stuff that I've been discovering over the last few months to the last year. So before I get into who I am, I just want to acknowledge the land that I work, live, and play on. So I'm located on the traditional territories of the Niitsitapi and the people of Treaty 7, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda. I work on the land where the Bow River meets the Elbow River, and the traditional Blackfoot name of this place is Maskwacis, which we now call the city of Calgary. So the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Region 3. I also want to acknowledge just really quickly about that we're going to be talking a lot about the Canadian colonial legal system today, and as everyone knows, that this system has committed a significant amount of harm against Indigenous peoples. So knowing this, I myself am continuing to learn and grow within the space and on my own reconciliation journey in and out of my professional life. Within my professional life, as part of this learning and growing, I really like to focus on providing accessible and transparent resources within the copyright context. So that's where most of my presentation is coming to you today from as well, is to attempt to make this type of, this law in particular, accessible to everyone. Oh, now it just wants to go backwards. There we go. So yes, my name is Taylor McPeak. My pronouns are she, her. I am the copyright advisor at Mount Royal University in Calgary, Alberta. My email is on the screen there. You can also go to the copyright website just as an FYI. So just a quick bit of background on me. I completed my MLIS, my Master of Library and Information Studies at the University of Alberta in 2020. So I am a trained librarian, but my focus and my specialty now is on copyright, specifically at Mount Royal. So as we're going along, we will have a Q&A session at the end of about 15 minutes. So I'll ask you to reserve your questions for then, just so I can hopefully get through all my slides. And then obviously we can have lots of discussions and stuff at the end. I will also be providing links to all of the different games that I'm going to be discussing today. So if I forget to send those links to the chat, just feel free to remind me, but I'll do that once we get to those slides. So as well, just because this is also a legal presentation where we're sort of touching on some legal concepts, just any sort of advice, information, or opinions provided during this presentation are not intended to constitute, nor do they replace legal advice, and do not create an attorney-client relationship. Please consult with a lawyer for any legal matters. As I kind of briefly described my background, I myself am not a lawyer, so therefore I cannot provide legal advice. All right. So what we're going to be going through today is just a few points before we get into the games about something called copyright anxiety and copyright chill. And then from there, we're going to contextualize this into what copyright literacy really is and how gamification fits into that. I'm going to provide some examples of various games and activities. Again, I believe I received a question about this when the Q&A had opened up, but I am framing this in an educational context. I come from an academic library. And so the question was, can this be used in other contexts? And of course it can. It will just have to kind of shift slightly to what your field is. And then finally, we will do our Q&A at the end. All right, so copyright anxiety. So copyright anxiety is this feeling essentially that, you know, as the name suggests, is this anxiety around copyright. So it's a lot of frustration, you know, annoyance, etc., around the use of copyrighted works or just the concept of copyright in general. This is stemmed from the fact that copyright can be particularly complex at times. And because if people aren't ingrained in it and working with it every day, this nuances, this gray area can essentially create this anxiety around actually using it. It's also known as copyright fear, copyright confusion, and copyright anxiety. And Amanda Wakaruk and Celine Guru-Brennan have done some amazing work in this particular field. So they're from the University of Alberta. I've listed their citation on their copyright anxiety scale, which they've developed. And if you're looking to see more work in this particular area of copyright, it's extremely interesting. But coming back to the point, so this copyright anxiety can unfortunately lead to something known as copyright chill. And so this is not the laid back type of chill when you're on a beach or anything. This is this kind of, frigid, unmoving, not wanting to pursue a creative project because of your fear around copyright chill. So copyright chill, I've gone too far ahead. Copyright chill can lead to situations where, you might have a legitimate purpose or a legitimate use of a copyright protected material, but it's either discouraged or inhibited by the threat of legal action, whether that legal action is real or perceived. This happens a lot to a lot of people, both in academic contexts and in not, where even just the idea of copyright scares people into not pursuing a project, or just again either making major alterations or just abandoning it altogether. And so again, with my practice and what I'm doing in my job day to day and in teaching sessions is I really like to reinforce the idea of copyright literacy, and with that making interactive and accessible activities and games in order to make that or to lower that barrier into this particular law. All right, so I won't go through this whole definition, but essentially copyright literacy, much like information literacy for those that work within the library sector, is essentially when you are more confident in your ability to understand copyright and all of its nuances. And specifically with copyright, this helps people identify what actually is protected by copyright, whether or not something qualifies under fair dealing or another constitutional user right under the copyright law. It helps people navigate how to obtain permissions and locate or negotiate licenses. And then it also helps you kind of recognize areas where something would be infringing and where it wouldn't. And of course, and most importantly, it also helps you understand the kind of ethical use behind particular copyright materials. And so again, the goal really is to establish this copyright literacy and to increase this and to develop more confidence in people overall so that they can navigate these issues again without this fear kind of bogging them down. So we have seen, there's been lots of studies. I just kind of noted one here, where there's lots of studies done on gamification and kind of improving various types of literacies. Particularly, we've seen this in libraries, or at least I've seen it in libraries that I've been to, where librarians, because the world is changing so rapidly and this field is changing so rapidly, you often have to be very creative when it comes to getting attention from students or faculty or whoever your audience is. And this creativity, this interactivity helps, again, drive that interest, and particularly with copyright. And I'll talk about UK copyright literacy kind of throughout this, but UK Copyright Literacy is a group in the UK where they have developed a number of different activities and games and such to improve copyright literacy. And they also notice similar things where people just weren't engaging with copyright because, let's be honest, most people assume, and are rightly so, it can be a dry topic at times. So to make it, again, more engaging, more interactive, this gamification of the concept really helps to kind of push that literacy and that confidence forward. So just as a really quick basic definition of what this means, gamification is when you apply game-based techniques in non-game contexts or serious games, which are in-depth simulations of real-life scenarios. So essentially creating a safe space in order to work within this particular complex topic, and while hopefully having fun along with it. And really you're just supporting learning through play, which is something something that, you know, we did when we were younger, but tends to be lost as we get older. And so really bringing that idea of play back into these complex topics can really help, again, lower these barriers to ultimately, and the whole point of it is to hopefully increase copyright literacy overall. All right, so I'm going to share the links to this in the chat. So I'm going to go through these different resources really quick, but I will put them here for people to follow along with. So first off is Copyright Dough. Second off is Copyright Card Game. The fourth game here is the Publishing Trap. The fourth one is the Open Access Escape Room. And then some additional methods that I'll touch on that I've been, you know, experimenting with over the last few years that I've been at this institution. So first off, we will look at Copyright Dough. And as the name suggests, Copyright Dough involves the use of Play-Doh. So this is essentially a role-playing like game where each participant is given a role, and those 4 roles are student, researcher, teacher, and now I'm forgetting the 4th role off the top of my head. Student, researcher. Anyway, there are 4 roles that they are assigned to. Creator, that's the 4th one. So essentially how this works is there are 2 phases to the game. So in the first phase of the game, you are given your role and you're given your task. You then complete your task 1. So for example, on this screen here, there's a task 1 for the researcher. So the task reads, your paper has been accepted for publication, but the journal is asking for some visuals to support your argument. One of the blue creators has the perfect model to use. Copy their creation so you can take a photo to include in your paper. Do not ask them for permission to copy their work. So then the researcher, the teacher, the student, they'll go around to the creators and essentially do what their task has instructed. Some of them will copy without asking for permission. Some of them will ask for permission. Some of them will rely on fair dealing, and others will get chilled and not do any sort of copying. And so from there, once the sculptures are made, so once you have your beautiful sculptures like this one here, such as a tiny penguin, then they move on to their task 2. And so they are either told to be honest with what they did with their copying or to lie in certain cases. And so essentially how this works then is there is this discussion point where each person that did the copying will then say, this is what I did. And then the group will vote whether or not this is okay or not okay in terms of copyright. So you have your voting cards right here. And for me, they're just about yay big, just a typical paper size. And so once everybody votes, they kind of discuss why they voted that way, and then you carry on to the next person. This game also comes with an information sheet. So I just have the one side on the screen there. So it's right here. And then on the back of the sheet is just information about the various Creative Commons licenses. And so that's a very quick rundown of the game. For me, when I conduct it as well, I'm often working in groups that may not have the strongest copyright literacy. So I take the first 10 to 15 minutes just to kind of talk briefly about what copyright really is and how it applies to educational contexts. So this is a really great game. It was originally developed by Hannah Pyman and Katrine Sunsbo. They are from the United Kingdom, and they have this game online, which is the one I linked. So this is the UK version of the game I developed, which is on the screen here. I developed the Canadian version. So if you would like the Canadian version and its materials, please just email me, and I'm happy to provide that link. So that's the first one right off the hop. And really quickly, as far as materials go, I can't quite reach them right now, but I just got a 36 pack of Play-Doh, like the little tiny ones, and that was all I needed. And it was about $35 at the time I bought it. So aside from that, you would just need to print these cards and then purchase Play-Doh. So Copyright the Card Game, and I'm just going to actually switch to a different screen really quickly. Let me just stop and reshare. Okay, so the copyright card game was developed a few years ago, and essentially this game goes through whether or not something's under copyright, the usages that you can use within the law, how do licenses work, and exceptions. And so you play a card game and go through the motions of it. So this is I've linked the main page to it. This one also has all the different versions as well as different international versions. So there's a US version, a Canadian version, Australian, and a Welsh version. So this is available as well. So I haven't played this one personally, but I just wanted to take the time to highlight it because it's something that was, again, is another accessible way and lowering barrier way to access copyright. The Canadian version specifically is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share as is, but if you wanted to adapt it, essentially you would just have the same license as they had given it. Okay. All right, so then the next one, I'm going to switch my screen again. Oops. The next one is the publishing trap. So this again is what I haven't tried myself yet, but I'm looking to try it this year. We're going to be hopefully working with some of our undergrad students and just kind of going through what publishing is like. So this one is not specific to copyright, but it is, is a bit copyright adjacent. And you can find all the resources here. And this particular one is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike. So same thing, if you were to adapt this particular game, you would just need to make sure it has the same license. And then finally, once more sharing. Let me share. Okay. Then finally, this one actually we are trying during Open Access Week at the end of October. So this is an open access escape room. I won't go into too much detail about this one just because if you do want to play it yourself, by reading these particular materials, you will spoil the game. So ensure that if you are going to conduct it, that you don't spoil yourself if you don't want to, if you don't want it ruined for you. But essentially this, if anyone's ever done an escape room before, escape rooms are essentially you're in a room and you have to find or solve a variety of puzzles in order to succeed in your mission or to escape the room. And so Katrine Sunsbo, who is also part of the copyright Doe development, also created this game to again kind of give more information and more access into what open access is and making it fun, so to speak. Okay, let me just do my last switch. There it goes. All right. So hopefully, yes, please keep those links. Again, all of these games are under a variety of open licensing, so they are accessible and they're easy to access. And all the materials are provided right there, which makes it a lot easier. And each one of them, I believe as well, either has a PowerPoint associated with it that will kind of walk you through the steps or an information sheet that will walk you through the steps. All right, so some additional techniques that I've tried over the last couple of years as well. I've just listed right here on the slide. The first one being debating. So this one I do in more of a controlled environment. I'm also an instructor during the winter semester, so I work as a contract instructor at my institution, teaching ethics and law within information design. And so I have taken the debate approach where we quite literally do a debate where each party goes back and forth debating a particular topic. I find that this one helps again kind of emphasize that learning objective of just doing your own research on the topic and being able to communicate it properly. So this one's always fun, and it's always fun to also engage competition here as well. On the topic of competition, I've also done Jeopardy style. And so there's a number of different websites you can go to where you can create your own Jeopardy game. And I've done this again with some external classes where, we're just kind of doing the basics of copyright, but in a fun, lively, competitive space where they just answer questions about the law. And then finally, throughout my training lectures that I'll do in student classrooms and also for faculty and staff at Mount Royal, I will also kind of discuss copyrightability and ownership and do some case studies on that. So the one I use most often is for the Oscar photo. So it was from the I never remember. I think it was the 2014 or 2016 Oscars where Ellen DeGeneres hosted it. So essentially she had gone into the crowd and asked a different actor to hold her phone and then take a selfie of all of them. And so we have this discussion around who would actually own that photo. So it's this discussion about ownership and the kind of technicalities of copyright. So I try to tie these to pop culture. I've also done something similar where we compare kind of similar IPs, like intellectual property, such as Dune by Frank Herbert and Star Wars by George Lucas. I also do copyright and cakes. This is a new activity that I'm starting in a couple weeks, actually, for a new student orientation, where we're going to be looking at a variety of different cakes and determining whether or not they would have copyright over them and who would be the copyright owner. So trying to, again, make it a bit more fun with involving tasty treats. And then finally, I also incorporate the Play-Doh in like I do for Copyright Dough in a bit of a smaller context where we essentially, when I go into classrooms, we kind of talk about the concept of originality under copyright. And so we use this by, I give them a prompt to make a Play-Doh sculpture, and then we talk about whether or not that sculpture would actually constitute copyright protection under how it's defined under the law. So that's usually my introduction to the topic. And it's a way to kind of, again, have a hands-on experience with it, make it fun because it's Play-Doh, and then ultimately kind of get those conversations started. And just as a side note, it's always quite funny whenever I walk into a room to do these classroom activities, because I'm sure that when the students hear that the copyright advisor is coming to talk to them, I'm sure they're not, super thrilled. But when I bring in Play-Doh and I put it down in front of the classroom, I usually get some kind of, the tone shifts a little bit, and there's definitely a lot more intrigue on the subject after that. And I believe that's my last slide. So that is all I have for everyone. I know that was a lot of information, but I am happy to take questions for our Q&A period.
So you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question. And if you would like to type it in chat, you're welcome to do so too. I have a question, Taylor.
Yeah, of course.
Tell us a little bit more about the open access escape room.
So I'm going to be quite frank. I have not had the chance to look at it yet. I mostly just wanted to give, I think I'm still screen sharing. I mostly just wanted to acknowledge that it exists, but I'm planning to do it with we have an open access working group here in the MRU library, and we are planning to hopefully host this game during open access week, but I've just included a brief description of it here. I believe there's a story where there's some sort of villain involved and you're trying to find the answers to his clues, and then ultimately it just becomes kind of testing your knowledge on what open access is and learning about it overall. But yes, I have not done it myself yet, but we are going to be doing it very, very soon. So I'm looking forward to it, and I'm happy to provide, if anybody's curious, I'm happy to provide how it goes after we try it out in October.
Taylor, what are the challenges you face when you're teaching about copyright? Like either with the instructors, students, content?
Yeah, so really the biggest challenge is just that copyright anxiety. So, I made a joke about me bringing in the Play-Doh and, faces lighting up a bit more, but that's really kind of my biggest challenge, is just getting past that hump of that, copyright is a complex topic. I'm certainly not going to disregard that, but it definitely can be understood. And so my goal is always to just kind of walk through what the basics of it are, because when I first started teaching about it, when I started in this job, I would talk about what it is, like just kind of give a brief definition. But I realized that in order to have kind of the more in-depth discussions around user rights and around other exceptions and, how it incorporates itself into publishing and open access and everything, there really needed to kind of be more of a fundamental understanding of what copyright even is. So I tend to step back and really just kind of emphasize, let's talk about what copyright is and how it fits into the work you're doing before we kind of go into the deeper discussions. So to circle back and actually answer your question, the biggest challenge is just, again, kind of the perception of what copyright is will often kind of skew people's view of it, and they're kind of already in a headspace somewhere over here where I'm trying to bring them back to understanding about it. So that's definitely been one of the biggest challenges.
What about the, copyright has so many open access licenses, because that in open access licenses also fair use. Do you find people are using open access Creative Commons licenses?
Yeah, at our institution, that's part of our open access working group, is really just to emphasize the importance of open access. So we are always looking to direct faculty to using those types of resources and, wherever they can. And when people come to me with questions, we go through the options of, whether or not a user right like fair dealing would apply, or if it doesn't, then we look down, the open access route and looking at Creative Commons licensed materials. And I do find, if I were to do stats on it, so to speak, that there are quite a number of people that are using open access resources. And so then that conversation just becomes, okay, what is the license, and how do we ensure that you're, following the terms of that license? And so I do get quite a few questions around that as well.
I noticed Celeste is writing many things in the chat about copyright. I have anxiety about sharing my version of Indigenous Identity Bundle. Same with using fancy text. I paid a guy to use his font in my presentation. And another guy said, you could use it for free as long as I don't charge it. Different fonts. Just a comment.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's, fonts are, it's another fun. Yeah, so I was about to say, yeah, everything does. Yeah, the one of the things I talk about when I talk about copyright and internet materials, or just digital spaces, it's best to just assume that everything has copyright and until told otherwise, because majority of the stuff you're going to find online is going to be under copyright, which can, of course, create some confusion sometimes, because I find that one of my most common misconceptions that I get is the misunderstanding between public access and public domain. So public domain being materials that no longer have copyright protection because the copyright has expired, and of course public access being things you can just access online. So I often find I'm having to kind of explain what those differences are, because the language is a little confusing because they are quite similar.
What about copyright access? Because when we are speaking about copyright, we also access is the word used. Copyright is also used to provide ethical access. How about the tutorials which were created by University of Alberta? Have you used those copyright tutorials?
Yes, I've realized I meant to, I'm just gonna grab that right now. I meant to link those in my presentation and then forgot. So thank you for the reminder. I just linked them now. So for anyone that hasn't done these or wants to do them again, University of Alberta has a really great series of instructional modules around copyright. It's called Opening Up Copyright. And it has everything from, the international treaties on copyright to copyright in a K-12 context, to interlibrary loans, to public domain, etc. So there's pretty much something for everyone there. And it's extremely, extremely helpful and really good way to kind of test your knowledge and learn something new. I also highly recommend for those that like want to learn more about copyright or just to be more in the conversation. The ABC Copyright Listserv is a really great place to ask questions and to just, communicate with people in the field. As well, there's a conference that goes along with ABC. Typically, it's in May of every year. The last couple of years, it's been online, but this upcoming year in 2024, it will be in person, which is pretty exciting. So it'll be nice to kind of go back in person.
Taylor, Lindsay has a question. Have you come across any games that address copyright and generative artificial intelligence?
I was waiting. I'm like, oh, there's got to be an AI question somewhere. Not yet. Part of me was kind of thinking of maybe developing something because I did quite a bit of digging into copyright and AI when the surge of ChatGPT was happening back last fall into the winter. So if anyone has any ideas and wants to work together on some sort of game like that, I would be happy to, because I do think it's one that I think can get attention, but it's also tricky because there's a lot of copyright theory behind AI. We're starting to slowly see some court cases come out of it, but yeah, it's one of those, it's very new type of things. So, definitely keep your eye on it. I'm sure if I don't do it or someone else will develop some sort of activity for it.